Are you playing to win or just running out the clock? In sports, the game clock drives every decision. It creates urgency, sharpens focus, and pushes players to perform their best. So what if you treated your life with that same sense of urgency? I've created an exercise to help you do just that. It's called Your Game Clock. Download Your Game Clock today at bill-burke.net/clock. It's free, it's simple, yet transformative, and it could be the first step towards achieving peak performance in the areas of your life that matter the most. Remember, life isn't a practice run. Every second counts, and your time is now. Ian, thanks for being here. This is so awesome. You've got an incredible story, and I'm so excited for the listeners to hear this episode because you and I met through a coaching group, but I'll just tell the listeners, I'm sure they'll get a feel for it, but you have a very calm, unassuming type of personality. However, when and I should say humble as well, because you weren't out there broadcasting your background and the challenges that you face. But when I really learned about your story, man, I was blown away. So I know the listeners are going to have the same reaction. So I really appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to see you again and to have a great conversation.
Yeah, Bill, it's good to see you again as well, man. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to hop on this podcast with you, and looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah, well, if you would, I know we're going to get into your big life event. This really defined a lot of what you're doing now and your past, of course, and all the challenges that you faced. We're going to dive into that because that's so fascinating to me. But outside of that, just give the listeners a little bit of background on you, what part of the country you're from, maybe some highlights from your younger days before we really dive into the challenges you faced and ultimately how you've overcome those challenges.
Sure, yeah. So I am currently in Northwest Indiana. I live in Chesterton, Indiana, which is about 40 minutes southeast of Chicago. So if you think about Lake Michigan, we're like right at the bottom of the lake. So little corner of Northwest Indiana. So I actually grew up though in Minnesota, born and raised, and I went to school in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is a neighboring town here. So that's how I came to be here in Northwest Indiana. Childhood, grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, had a great childhood. I was an athlete. Soccer was my sport. I did dabble in a bunch of other ones, but my parents had me involved in everything. So I was playing tennis, I was downhill skiing, I was playing soccer, basketball, baseball, all the things. But my heart settled on soccer, and that's what I stuck with all the way up into and through college. Currently now, fast forward a bunch of years, I own a gym with my wife, Dana. So we have a boot camp. And our second business is the positive persistence business, which is getting into motivational speaking and also some success coaching as well.
Well, that's amazing. And you went from the very beginning to the current state of where you're at, but there's a lot that has happened in between those two things. So if you would, let's jump into it. You've built this business or multiple businesses, I'm assuming, as a result of some of the challenges that you've faced. And of course, everybody along the way has got some level of adversity, but you have had really a high level of adversity in the health arena. You had a health issue. So just describe what that's about, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty rare, but tell everybody what went down, when it happened, what it was, and initially what your reaction to that was.
And you're exactly right, Bill. The things that I'm doing right now, the journey that I'm on right now, is a direct result to the health issue that I had. If it weren't for that, oddly enough, I'm actually grateful for it, because if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. And I probably would have gotten into the fitness industry, which has become a passion of mine. But to break it down, it was 2009 and I was 32 years old at the time. I was in great shape. I was actually training. I started running because, as I mentioned, I had played soccer for most of my life. After college was over, I played a little bit here or there, but I didn't have a way to compete anymore. So I started to run. So I was training for running 5Ks. And this was June of 2009. I had a 5K I was training for in August of that year. I started to have some strange tingling sensations in my right leg. And not to get too granular in the details, that tingling sensation started to spread throughout my body. Went to the doctor, got it checked out, and they didn't know what it was. They thought I had actually maybe gotten into some poison ivy or something like that. And I started to have some more issues, some more symptoms where I started to have some chest pain right underneath my pecs on both sides, and it wouldn't go away. And it was unexplainable, and the doctors thought maybe I had pulled a muscle, because at that point in my life I was running a couple times a week, I was weight training a couple times a week, so I was pretty active, and they thought maybe I pulled a muscle. Well, okay. Try to take some Aleve, Advil, didn't touch any of this pain. This tingling sensation was getting worse. And so finally, I went in for an MRI, and they found something on my spinal cord. Now, they didn't know what it was, and they weren't very clear, so I had to go back for a second MRI. And when I did that, they were able to finally make a distinction of, yes, there is something on your spinal cord. We don't know what it is, but we can see that there is a growth that's happening. So my family doctor said, look, we're not messing around with anybody around here. You're going to a specialist. So she sent me up to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where they did a battery of tests. And they said, okay, you definitely have something on your spinal cord. And what is alarming is the time that you had between your first MRI and the one that we just gave you, it is growing, and it's growing rapidly. So at this point in time, I've had these tingling sensations that are, if I had to describe it, would be like if you ever had a foot fall asleep or a hand fall asleep, that tingling, that kind of the pins and needles. So it felt like that. So I had that going on. I had this chest pain going on, and now I had a new issue, and that was I started to have some ambulatory issues, meaning like I would be sitting down at my desk at work, and I would get up to move, and I couldn't for 60 seconds, almost like the message from my brain to my muscles and back was garbled or wasn't going through. And it took a minute for my body to say, oh, okay, that's what we're doing. We need to start moving. So that really freaked me out, because I was like, this is out of the ordinary. Went through all the tests, as I mentioned, at the Mayo Clinic, and they said, look, all of our tests came back inconclusive. Here's what we think. It's either something that's called neurosarcoidosis, which is a rare disease, or it could be a tumor, so it could be cancer. But since all of the tests that we ran were inconclusive, we have to go in and take a biopsy so we can figure out what the course of treatment needs to be. So there I am, 32 years old, thinking, oh, wow. Okay, so you're telling me I'm either have cancer, potentially, or I have this disease I never heard of before. And for anybody who may have heard of sarcoid before, sarcoid is usually diagnosed, or more, I should say, more prominently diagnosed as pulmonary sarcoid in your lungs. What they were telling me is I had a rare form of this rare disease that was called neurosarcoidosis, which attacks your neurological system. So when I say that I had something growing on my spine, I had actually had something growing inside of my spinal cord. So when they had to go in and take the biopsy, they sat me down and they said, look, this is a very risky surgery, because we have to go in and basically take a piece of your spinal cord, because this lesion or this growth is actually inside your spinal cord. And as there isn't any vacant real estate on a spinal cord, right? Like it's 100%, you need every millimeter of it, right, to function.
Everything has a purpose there.
Exactly. So they said that you could be paralyzed for the rest of your life. Being 32 years old, and as I look back, I think that I was pretty naive in thinking to myself, okay, let's go in, do the surgery, figure out what you need to figure out. Let's get me patched up and ready to go, because I have this race that I need to run in August. So I say, okay, let's do the surgery. Do the surgery. I wake up. I'm in my recovery room, and the doctors say, good news. It's not cancer. It is what we actually thought it was, which is neurosarcoidosis, which is treatable. It's not curable. So that's great. But shortly thereafter, I realized from the chest down, I had lost everything. So at that point, I was paralyzed from my chest to my toes. Couldn't feel anything, couldn't move anything. I was basically 75% of my body was gone. And the doctors told me that we think with time you'll be able to walk again, but you're probably going to need a cane, crutches, or a walker to do. And I don't know if that just wasn't computing with me or not, because my mind went immediately to, well, I've got this race. So I said to my doctors, well, am I ever going to run again? And that's when they said no. So at that point, 32 years old, at that time, I have two children from my first marriage. My daughter was 6, my son was 1. I was in peak physical condition, and the doctors are saying, well, you're going to be relegated to some sort of durable medical equipment for the rest of your life. And that just didn't sit right with me. I think that for some people, that may have been like, this is it. This is like the end of my life as I know it. But for me, that was, I guess, a bit of a challenge. And I joke about this. Rest his soul, my father has passed, but we had a very tumultuous relationship. Our heads butted all the time when I was growing up. I'm the only child, and he was very, we'll say, strict. And these are the things how they need to be. They're going to be done my way. And I was a strong-willed kid. And I joke to say that I've always had an aversion to authority because of him. So when the doctor said you're basically not going to run again and you're going to be relegated as a handicap of some sort, I was like, no, that's not going to happen. I almost took it as an insult. You don't even know me. Like, how are you going to put that on me? And then from there on, I was like, well, just watch me walk again.
Yeah.
Someday, watch me run again. And to this day, I've been able to disprove them. I have since run 2 marathons, and I'm able to walk unassisted. I have become, obviously, I own a gym, so I have become a personal trainer. I've been in the gym space and a coach for the last 12 years. So just being able to overcome someone else's perception of my ability, I just didn't let that become my reality. And I think that is such a huge tool, if you want to call it that. What I would like to call it is a mindset, is not to let someone else basically tell you what you're worth or what you can do.
Yeah.
And for me, my mindset is what saved me. That's what sparked the fight. And I guess if I look back on it, that's what's carried me through to this victory that I've had. But to be clear, I'm not out of the woods. I still have deficiencies from that surgery. My goal in the beginning was 100% recovery, but I still have deficiencies. And I had to come to the realization, and this was only a couple of years ago, because this is, again, we're going back to 2009. We're talking like 15 years ago. I had to come to the realization a couple of years ago that I'm never going to make 100% recovery, at least in the lens I was looking at back then. Because when they told me that you can't, and I was like, yes, I can, and I will be 100% of everything I was before the surgery. That's just not realistic and not going to happen. But what I've since learned is that I can be 100% of what I'm capable of right now.
Yes.
And that is what is fulfilling for me to continue to push, because there are still things. And here's a little caveat, is that my doctors told me after 2 years, you're going to stop seeing any type of advancement in your recovery. So it's going to be like a ceiling at 2 years, and you're basically going to, as far as you've gotten at that point, that's as far as you're going to get. But I'm still seeing things that I can do now that I couldn't do last year. And it's the power of the mind. And for me, if you have your mindset locked in and you combine that with your heart, meaning your conviction, if those two things are in alignment, watch out, because then you're on fire and you're unstoppable.
Yeah. Well, man, thanks for sharing that. That is an amazing story. And I love that you jumped to the mind. And of course, you've built a business on that. And we're both in that space and believe in it so strongly. I want to go back real quick just to that point after the second MRI when they say, okay, there's a growth inside your spinal cord. What was your very first initial reaction before you had time to really process anything. A lot of people go to that space of why me? What's going to happen? Of course, they're very uncomfortable with the uncertainty. And anytime you hear spinal cord, people know that's important, even though they might not know the intricacies of what the diagnosis may be. But what
Yeah.
was your very first initial reaction as you're either laying there on the table or sitting in the doctor's office and they said, okay, we found something on your spinal cord?
What are we going to do about it?
Wow.
That's my initial reaction, right?
Yeah.
So I truly believe that in any scenario, any situation, you have the power of choice. And you have two choices, right? It boils down to two choices and how you're going to react or respond to that scenario. It's either going to be positive or negative. So if you're going to come at me with some information like that, I either have a choice to say, well, what am I going to do now? Why is this happening to me? Woe is me. What's my life going to be like? My life is over. What am I supposed to do? But that doesn't serve me in any way. But if I take it and I say, okay, this is what you're telling me, how are we going to fix it? What are we going to do to move forward? What's the next step, doc? Because I'm counting on you to give me some answers to get me back to where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So immediately it was, what's the plan? Because we need to do something about this.
Yeah. I love that. I love that mentality. And consider yourself so blessed to have that, because I think a lot of people would have went the other direction. And a lot of people, I think, because they're sitting across from a doctor who's got a lab coat on, has got a
Mm.
fancy degree on the wall, they just take them at their word and
Yes.
accept that's the end and that's the diagnosis. And I've been down this road before myself. And sometimes even the vibe of the person giving you the news can affect your own mind. So you've got to be independently strong mentally and make certain decisions intentionally of what's going to happen. Now, you might need some time to process those things.
Sure.
Sounds like immediately you were ready to roll. But I think that's such a powerful lesson for the listeners. You get to decide. I think we all have more agency in our lives than we even realize. And we let other people put those ceilings on us. So I love what you just said. And then take me to, because I'm fascinated by this. You mentioned the relationship with you and your father, and it's just really amazing to me how things that maybe we think are a detriment can come back to serve us in the future. So, not uncommon for fathers and sons to have a little bit of friction. I've been there at times with my own son, even though we have a great relationship. But man, the way that served to construct your mentality for this specific situation, almost one of defiance and
Absolutely.
one that's turned into such a positive way to live your life now, not just in that scenario, but ongoing moving forward. I mean, talk a little bit about maybe the fact that there really are no coincidences and everything happens for a reason, and that served you, that relationship and that friction served to kind of shape who you really are at your core, which enabled you to battle this very rare, challenging condition.
Yeah. If for me personally, I really believe that if we're paying attention, we can learn something from any situation that we are in, good or bad, right? And if we're doing ourselves a favor, we're going to pay attention to those situations so that we can use whatever we can, extrapolate whatever we can from that situation to serve us later on. Talk about the metaphysical backpack that we wear, that when we come up against an obstacle and we overcome it, we have now created a tool. However we did break through that adversity, however we did overcome that challenge, the simple fact is that we did it somehow, some way. And we take that tool, that whatever we use, we put it in a metaphysical backpack and we go along with our lives. And then when the next challenge comes up, boom, we pull that tool out. And as Ben Newman likes to say, we pound the stone, right? We go after it and we break through another wall. And then now we have another tool. We stick that in the metaphysical backpack and we just carry these with us and we keep stacking those wins and carrying those tools. But the key is that we have to remember that we have them with us when adversity hits.
Right.
And speaking of adversity, to circle back, yes, I had an adversarial relationship with my father, for sure. And being an only child, a lot of the times it was like, it's on me. I need to figure this out, or I need to battle back against my oppressive dad. Well, she wasn't really that bad. I needed to do things on my own, really. And one of those experiences where my parents dropped me off at camp when I was 8 years old. And this was a camp 5 hours away. And this was a 4-week wilderness camp.
Whoa.
Now, peace out. And this is a camp where this was in the boundary waters of Minnesota. This is like northern Minnesota, bordering Canada. And you're there for 4 weeks. And one of the first things you got to do is like a swim test to make sure that you know how to swim. You got to jump in this freezing cold water, tread water for a minute. And I mean, I hated it, but little did I know I'm building mental fortitude as this is happening. And then, some of the activities that we did at this camp where you were in a canoe, which is why you had to learn or make sure you knew how to swim. You're in a canoe and we are paddling for miles a day on the boundary waters. You get to some land and you have to do what's called portaging, which means now you have to take your canoe out of the water, hold it over your head, and trek through the woods until you get to water again. Sometimes that was a mile walk. And did I mention you have a 40-pound pack on your back? Let me remind you, I'm 8 years old. Right?
That
So I
truly
was,
sounds like a boot camp, which is
well,
another full service or full circle moment to where you're at now.
right. It was an experience that I will never forget, but it was an adversarial experience that helped me build the resiliency and that mental fortitude that I would use later on in life. And like you, I had to battle back from an injury to be able to play the sport that I loved. And that was in high school. I wanted to make varsity soccer. I got injured the year before, I think my junior year, and I was unable to do that. So I had to battle back. And that's when I fell in love with lifting weights because I've always been like a thin little guy. So I had to put on some muscle. I had to battle back from the injury. And at that point in time, my summer job was I was a merchandiser for Pepsi Cola. And it was a 12-hour shift. Like you would get up at midnight and you would go stock shelves until noon. So I would do that, but then I would come home and I would work out for 2 hours, eat, go to sleep, wake up and repeat for the summer. And that again was like discipline, work ethic, building that mindset of this is what I want to do and this is what it's going to take. So either I do it or I don't. Like those are the options. Either
Yep.
I make it or I make it. And that's it. There's no plan B. And that's something that's helped me drive forward from my surgery. And I like to insert that in my life wherever I can when I'm going after something, when I have a challenge that's ahead of me that I want to achieve something. So there is no plan B. Like you either make it or you make it. And that's it. And so again, that the adversity that I had waking up paralyzed, that has prepared me to deal with adversities of being an entrepreneur and a business owner. So you're exactly right. All the things that we go through, again, if we're paying attention, we can learn from them and use them to help strengthen our resolve. Because when we can remember how strong we've been in the past, that will help and prepare us for any type of challenge that we have in the future.
Yes, 100%. What were maybe one or two of because this rehab, this recovery, I imagine there were some dark moments, probably some lonely moments. What are maybe one or two moments where you are at your lowest and you're just maybe doubting yourself or questioning yourself or trying to put it all into perspective? Because obviously positivity can go a long way and you've got to have a strong mindset, but even the strongest go through those moments, maybe in times of silence where they start to crack a little bit. Did you have one or two of those moments?
Absolutely. Lucky for me, I had an amazing physical therapist. I had an awesome physical therapist while I was in the hospital. I was there for about 4 weeks before they would release me. And when I got home, I started working with my therapist, Dolly Fatke. Love her to pieces. And we really had a great relationship. As you would think if you see somebody for an hour, 5 days a week, multiple weeks in a row, that was my physical therapy at the time. We really had a great relationship. So on those days where I would come in feeling the weight of my situation, And there were those days that I had those pity parties for myself. Like, why did I elect the surgery? What if I would have gone with the other option? The other option was to try to medicate the situation. But a little detail I didn't say before is that we tried that route and it didn't work. So I thought to myself, what if I didn't do the surgery? I wouldn't have these issues right now. And I'd come into physical therapy and Dolly knew me well enough just to see it on my face. Like that I was not my regular. Typically I'm pretty upbeat and I'm like, let's go, let's get to work because, I wanted to be better like yesterday. So let's get it on. So I would come into therapy and she would see it on me that I wasn't feeling it. And she would let me sit in my feelings for a minute. And then she would look me dead in the face and say, are you done now? Can we get to work? And I love that about her because she let me sit in the emotion. She didn't glaze over it and try to like pump me up and just forget about it. She let me feel it. She let me sit in it. But then she was like, that's enough. Let's go. So I think that's the lesson. That's the key. Allow yourself to acknowledge the pain. Allow yourself to acknowledge the sadness, whatever negative emotion that is tagging along with the situation. It's okay. Sit in it for a minute, but then let it go. And then refocus on, okay, what do I need to do to get myself out of this situation? Or what are the steps that I need to take to move forward? Because if we sit in that pity party for too long, again, it doesn't serve us. All that's going to do is keep us from getting to where we really want to be, whether that be happiness, whether that be achievement, whether that be feeling fulfilled. If we sit there and you cry over spilled milk, as the saying goes, what does that serve? What does that do for you?
And it becomes easier and easier to do that. So it becomes harder and harder to pull yourself out of that. So yeah, you're 100% right. It becomes a habit, an easy habit to fall back on and use as a crutch. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But I wanted to ask too, what role or what impact did your condition have on your relationships with family and friends? And how did their support or lack of it contribute to your mental toughness as well?
I had a great support system. Luckily for me, my parents, who lived in Minnesota as I was growing up, they moved down to the Valparaiso area previous to my surgery. Because as I mentioned, I had two kids, and God forbid they want to move down to be closer to me. You have some grandbabies, and your parents are
That's
they'll
right.
make that shift,
I've
right?
been down that road too.
Yeah. So luckily for me, they were around. They actually shuttled me to and from physical therapy for quite some time. I had a great set of friends that would do whatever they could to help out, especially around the house, because at the time it was my then wife and my two small kids and me. So like there were things that needed to be done, like mowing the grass and going grocery shopping and taking the kids to the preschool and things like that that need help with. They helped out with that. The company that I worked for a beverage distributor, and it was a family owned company. And the owners were awesome. They gave me basically as much time as I needed to do what I needed to do, because for them, they told me like, our most important thing for you is for you to take care of you. So whatever you need to do for physical therapy, you need to take off in the middle of the day to go get that done. Totally fine. So that was awesome. So I had a lot of support from work, from my immediate family, and from friends. So that was great. However, they couldn't do the work for me. So when it comes to mental fortitude and mental toughness, like I said, I had physical therapy every day for an hour, 5 days a week. Well, I would get home from physical therapy and then I would do extra work. I would ask my physical therapist, do you have homework for me? What can I do at home? And so she made basically a regiment for me to do that would take me 2 hours to do.
Wow.
So it would be an hour of physical therapy, get home, and now I'm doing 2 more hours of exercises. And when I say exercises, I'm not talking about like jumping jacks and squats and burpees. I'm talking about just trying to move my toes or trying to lift a leg up or using my walker to ambulate around the house, like little things. But those little things would take me a very long time, like moving from the couch to the kitchen to make myself a sandwich for lunch, maybe a 30-minute exercise for me. So
Wow.
it was just a lot of work that I had to do on my own, but it was great to have all that support because I didn't have to worry about a lot of the other things that I would normally worry about on a day-to-day basis if I didn't have that
Mhm.
issue. So they made space for me to be able to really hone in and focus on recovery.
That's amazing. That's so important to a huge recovery like you were going through. I can't imagine even attempting to do that completely on your own. So I'm so glad to hear that you had a great support system. I'm curious too, like through those dark moments or maybe even some of the better moments, did you start to develop habits and routines, maybe even on a micro level of developing mental toughness for yourself? Or maybe that's just having conversations with yourself. So, what specific examples, little things that people can do that are listening that are maybe facing a challenging time right now that you implemented that they can now take and use in their own lives?
Yeah, I will reference our friend Ben Newman again with the standard, right? And I was set, and I didn't know it at the time, but I had set a standard for myself in terms of I am going to do everything in my power. I'm going to turn over every rock, leave no stone unturned for me to recover. So if that means that I'm going to get up early and do what I can in terms of movement before I go into physical therapy, and then when I get home from physical therapy, I'm going to do more, that's what I'm going to do. So the question is, what is the standard that you're going to set for yourself? What is the thing that you're going to say, okay, if I'm going to do this, if and that's really what it comes down to. No one is going to come and do it for you. Right? We've all heard the saying, no one's coming to save you, so you got to save yourself. So you have to set that standard of this is the work that I'm going to put in. This is what I am going to do. Because if I don't do it, it's not going to happen. I can't rely on someone else to come put the work in for me to get to where I want to be, because I'm the only one that knows that. I'm the only person that knows what is going to make me happy with the effort that I put in to get to where I want to go. Because I could have easily not have done all that work, and I could probably still be using some sort of durable medical equipment and maybe some other version of Ian somewhere that would be good enough. But for this version, that wasn't the standard. The standard was I'm walking again unassisted, and someday I'm running again.
Yes.
So if you set that standard, and again, there is no other option than you are going to hit it, then you're going to start to find ways to succeed. Then you're going to start to see other avenues that you can utilize or other avenues that you can pursue to get you to where you want to go. There's a quote by Eric Thomas, right?
Yeah.
Motivational speaker. And he says, when you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, that's what it's going to happen. And I
That's right.
love that because it's, yes, when you want it bad enough, and you're going to do anything to get it. So if you're in that dark place, you have to find that thing that you want bad enough that you will do everything in your power to go get it. And again, remember, you've been in this situation before. Let's go back and when you were a kid and you wanted that bike. For me, sorry for my past, I wanted this BMX bike. Parents are like, okay, well, you need to get A's on your spelling test for X amount of time, and then you got to put in half of the money for it. Okay, you better believe I was studying my spelling words and my vocab to ace those tests and saving my allowance to get that bike.
Yeah.
So what was it? It was just the fact that I wanted this thing so bad that I was gonna do what I had to do to get it. So I created a plan. I'm gonna work this plan so I get what I want.
Yes.
But it's no different now when there is something, whether you're in a place where of despair and you feel like the world is on your shoulders or you're backed up against the wall or you're in a corner like I don't know what to do next. Well, yes, you do. You just have to think about it. Where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? What are the steps that you need to take? And if your reason, your purpose, or your why is big enough, it's going to pull you through whatever obstacles stand in your way. Question is, how bad do you want it?
So well said, man. And it makes me think of one of the frameworks that I use in my coaching, which is dreams, decisions, and discipline. And you're a perfect example of that. You exemplified all three throughout your entire journey. You had the dream of not just getting back to where you were before, but excelling and running in races. You made decisions that set a standard for yourself in terms of your rehab. And then you are the embodiment of discipline, going through your rehab and then asking your therapist for extra work and then disciplining yourself to do that extra work, not just for a couple of minutes, but for hours on end. I mean, you're just the perfect example of it. Last question, or I guess second to last question I wanted to ask. We talked a lot about adversity and the challenges that you faced. Give me one or two moments of triumph or victory that showed you that there was light at the end of the tunnel, or that you were defying the odds, and that really contributed to your own pride, your self pride, and
Yeah.
the commitments that you made to yourself. Were there one or two moments like that where you just said, I am proud of myself, I'm kicking this thing's butt, and I'm on my way back?
There were a lot of instances. And when I look back, and I feel that it's important to make this point that I didn't do enough celebrating my small wins, because I was always beating myself up a little bit in terms of not beating myself up. That's not a good way to describe it, but I was always looking forward. Like, what's the next thing I need to do to get better? What's the next thing I need to do so I can walk? And then when I was able to do that, what's the next thing I need to do so I can run? What's the next thing I need to do so I can run faster? And it was, again, my physical therapist, Dolly, who would make me pause. And she would tell me, like, instead of you getting upset that you're not far enough, fast enough, why don't you look back and notice all the small wins that you've accumulated up to this point? Look how far you've come. Like, you were paralyzed with 75% of your body non-responding. And here we are. And it was about a year and a half later that I was able to go from being in a wheelchair to a walker to two canes to one cane to finally nothing. And she would remind me, look how far you've come. Look
Yeah.
at the small wins that you have accumulated along the way. And that's so important. But one of those small wins was at physical therapy. We were working on stepping up a 6-inch riser, right? And I think about it now, it's okay, that's like a step in your house. That's not really a big deal. But for me, that was monumental. Stepping up a 6-inch riser without holding on to anything. And we were working on it for a while in physical therapy. And then finally one day, I did it. And I stepped up on that riser without holding on anything. And I felt amazing. But then I had to think to myself, could I have done this last week? Could I have done this yesterday in physical therapy when I failed to do it without holding on to something? And that got me thinking about, well, what was standing in my way? Was it the ability to do it? I don't think so. It was fear. It was the fear of falling that stopped me from trusting myself to take that step. And I think that's such a huge lesson for all of us that can be implemented in a lot of different facets in life, that we don't take that step because we either don't have the self-confidence that we believe that we can do it, or we're fearful that we're going to fail, or enter in whatever outcome you want, but that fear stands in our way. And once we're able to believe in ourselves and think to ourselves, again, have that mindset that I am going to succeed no matter what, we finally start to push against that fear a little bit. And the more that we do that, eventually that fear is going to disappear and we're going to succeed. So that was one instance that I remember. Another one was swimming for the first time. I had a local YMCA, and I'll never forget this. I went to see Avatar. Avatar was in the movie theater.
Yeah.
And there's a scene in Avatar where the main character, he's paralyzed, he's in a wheelchair, but he gets his avatar body and he wakes up for the first time and he breaks out of the medical facility. He's running outside and he can feel the ground on his toes. And you can see the look on his face, like he's like, this is awesome. This is great. And I connected with that so much. The next day I went to the YMCA and I got into the pool and I started to swim. Now I couldn't use my legs, so I had to actually wrap a flotation device around my legs to keep them buoyant, and my upper body did all the work. But it was like a whole new world for me. Like I can swim. Like I am not going to be relegated to a cane or a walker or a wheelchair. There are so many things that I can still do.
Yeah.
And that was like, boom, okay, like this is not going to stop me. I'm going to find a way to do the things that I still love to do as I'm working towards getting back to the body that I want to have.
I love it, man. It's so inspiring to hear you talk through these stories and to take myself and the audience and the listeners back to those moments, because I can visualize you in the pool and the look on your face and the inspiration and confidence that you're continuing to gain each and every time, each and every day that passes, each and every time that you're rehabbing. So thank you so much for sharing those amazing stories. And I'm just, again, continue to be so inspired by your story. Leave the listeners with one piece of advice. If you had to boil everything down, positive persistence in your mindset, somebody out there who's struggling right now, leave them with one thing that they can carry with them throughout the rest of their day and lean on maybe tomorrow when they wake up and they've got to face those same set of challenges once again.
Absolutely. I'll leave you with two. One is a quote that a friend of mine, one of my best friends from high school, he laid this on me when I was in the hospital. And it's a quote from Gandhi. And it is that strength does not come from physical capacity. It comes from an indomitable will. So again, that speaks to if you want it bad enough, let nothing standing in your way to get it. And then the other is something that I found during my rehab and that it speaks to that mindset again, is that positive thoughts yield positive outcomes, right? You've heard it said before, you are what you think about. So if you are surrounding yourself with negative thoughts of why me, how am I ever going to get out of this? All these bad things always just happen to me. Well, guess what? They're going to continue to happen because you're actually pulling that energy towards you. But when you start thinking positively about what can I do to get myself out of the situation? Or I have faith that I have what it takes to succeed, or any type of a positive affirmation that you can be putting out there about your situation and thinking to yourself that I am going to win. There again, you start to pull those things towards you. Easier said than done, but when you can start thinking positively, positive thoughts yield positive outcomes.
So powerful, man. So powerful. So many nuggets of greatness packed into what you said here on this show. And I am so excited for the feedback that's going to come from some of the listeners, because I love your story. I love your inspiration and I love your positivity. I think, like you said, willpower is so underrated. We have so much power within ourselves to affect change in our own lives and then to, of course, have an impact on others as well. Ian, tell everybody where they can follow your journey, because like you said, it's not over. You continue to battle every day. Where can they connect with you or follow what you're up to now?
Yes, you can find me on all my socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, look at Ian R. Bowen. You can also check out the website, which is thepositivepersistence.com. And there you can find links to the socials, to the Positive Persistence podcast. And soon we'll be launching our first coaching program. So that'll be coming up pretty soon. I'm really excited about that, just because I'm able to add more value to more people and help them step into the next step version of themselves, which is something that I'm passionate about doing now, going through my journey, that I know that there are so many people out there that need that help, that encouragement, that support to get out of the situation that they're in now and to learn that they are more powerful than they realize, and that they too can step into the next best version of themselves and overcome adversity. And something that my mentor, Amberly Lago, says is that resiliency is not about bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward.
Oh, man. Never heard that one before, but I love that. I will be using that going forward. Ian, thanks so much, man. I couldn't be happier that you were able to come on the show, and I know that this episode is going to have such a huge impact. So, all the best to you in 2025, and thanks again for being here.
Bill, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.